Amazing afternoon, everyone. This is Sharni Yamama Ginano, your reporter for Chapter 15, Modeling Human Behavior, and Chapter 16, Forecasts and Fudge Factors. This is in continuation and the last part for Group 4 reporting. So, welcome to Chapter 15, Modeling Human Behavior, Bounded Rationality or Rational Expectations. If the previous chapters presented useful formulations and techniques to capture decision making in dynamic models, this chapter presents principles for formulating the decision roles in models so they are consistent with the actual decision making capabilities of real people. According to Herbert Alexander Simon, an economist, political scientist, and cognitive psychologist, whose primary research interest was decision making within organizations, there can no longer be any doubt that the micro assumptions of economic theory, the assumptions of perfect rationality, are contrary to fact. It is not a question of approximation. They do not even remotely describe the process that human beings use for making decisions in complex situations. To mimic the behavior of real systems, models must capture decision making as it is, not as it should be, nor how it would be if people were perfectly rational. Experimental and field studies show that the rationality of human decision making is bounded. An extensive body of experimental and field studies document human decision making behavior in diverse contexts. As you might expect, the way people make decisions depends somewhat on the situation. Some decisions are made automatically, like, for example, which pair of socks should I wear this morning? Other decisions involve considerable time, resources, and deliberative effort, and along with it are the emotions and feelings, like what kind of car should I buy later? Human decision making generally falls in between the extremes of mindless rote behavior and the perfect rationality of economic theory. The evidence suggests that the rationality of human decision making is bounded. So it has been suggested already based on the evidence that the rationality of human decision making is bounded. But before we go further into that, let us also define what is rational expectations. And with that, we will be able to differentiate these two theories, the bounded rationality theory and rational expectations theory. So, what is rational expectations theory? It is a concept and modeling technique that is used widely in macroeconomics. The theory assumes that individuals base their decisions on three primary factors. First, their human rationality. Second, the information available to them. And third, their past experiences. It suggests that people's current expectation of the economy are themselves able to influence what the future state of the economy will become. The actual theory of rational expectations was proposed by John F. Muth in his seminal paper. John F. Muth, or John Fraser Muth, is the father of the national expectations revolution in economic. Both use the term to describe numerous scenarios in which an outcome depends partly on what people expect will happen. Some assumptions held by the rational expectations theory are: individuals use their ability to rationalize when making decisions. On average, people hold expectations that will be fulfilled, and others learn from past mistakes. So, next, what is bounded rationality? The theory of bounded rationality holds that an individual's rationality is limited by the information they have, the cognitive limitations of their minds, and the finite amount of time they have to make a decision. This theory was proposed by Herbert Alexander Simon as a more holistic way of understanding decision making. It arises because human cognitive capabilities, as wonderful as they are overwhelmed by the complexity of the systems we are called upon to manage. The capacity of the human mind for formulating and solving complex problems is very small compared with the size of the problem whose solution is required for objectively rational behavior in the real world or even for a reasonable approximation to such objective rationality. Bounded rationality, as mentioned a while ago, it resulted from limitations on our knowledge, cognitive capabilities, and time. Our perceptions are selective. Our knowledge of the real world is incomplete. Our mental models are grossly simplified and imperfect, and our powers of deduction and inference are weak and fallible. Emotional, subconscious, and other non rational factors affect our behavior. Deliberation takes time, and we must often make decisions before we are ready. As an example, consider a basic problem facing the managers of any business: capital investment. Managers must decide when and how to invest in capacity and only desire to invest when they believe the investment will be profitable. To do so optimally, they must choose the rate of investment that maximizes the net present value of the firm's expected profits for all future time. As the competitive environment, input costs, demand, interest rates, and other factors affecting profits change, they must take into account all possible contingencies, including the ways in which other actors in the environment, such as suppliers, competitors, workers, customers, government, and so on, might react to any decision the firm makes. In general, these inputs are linked in a complex network of feedback relationships and may also be influenced by random shocks. Cognitive limitations. Humans have a limited ability to process information. As a consequence, perception of information is not comprehensive but selective. For both physiological and psychological reasons, we perceive and attend to only a small fraction of the information available in the environment. Instead, people take very few cues into account when making decisions. So then, attention is a scarce resource and must be allocated among competing demands. We focus our attention on some cues and ignore or remain unaware of other, potentially important cues. Our cognitive capabilities are similarly bounded. Miller famously showed that short term working memory is limited to 7 plus 2 chunks of informations or within the range of 5 to 9. Constraints on the storage and recall of information in long term memory and on intuitive computational power have also been identified. Because our cognitive and decision making capabilities are limited, we cannot make decisions according to the prescription of optimization theory. Instead, We use consciously and unconsciously a wide range of heuristics to make decisions. A large and diverse body of empirical and experimental research, generally known as behavioral decision theory or BDT, documents the heuristic people use in judgment and decision making. How individual and organizational responses to bounded rationality. Since optimal decision making with perfect models is impossible, people and organizations have developed a number of ways to simplify the task of decision making. First, we have the habit, routines, and rules of thumb. Habits and routines are procedures followed repetitively and without significant deliberative effort. Instead of deciding what to do each morning by considering the costs and benefits of all our options, most of us follow a routine. Like, for example, morning exercises, shower, get dressed, and so on. We don't think about it, we just do it because it's our daily routine. Routines are nearly automatic procedures triggered by particular conditions. They are the organization's standard operating procedures. Routines may be informal or highly codified protocols. They may be rigid or permit some flexibility in response to local conditions. Another common method to reduce the complexity of decision making is through rules of thumb. A rule of thumb is a procedure designed to yield a pretty good decision quickly and easily. Rules of thumb or decision making heuristics are based on simplified, incomplete models of the problem situation. They tend to rely on relatively certain information readily available to the decision maker. Second, managing attention. Since attention is a scarce resource, controlling the information people have access and attend to is an important source of power. Organizations have developed many structures and routines to control access to information, directing the attention of its members towards some cues and away from others. These devices include formal reporting relationships, agenda setting, the geographical structure of the organization, and physical layout of its facilities, and accounting and information systems. Next is goal formation and satisficing. Another strategy to reduce the complexity of the decision task is goal setting. Instead of making decisions by explicitly solving optimization problems, people instead tend to set goals and adjust their behavior in an attempt to meet them. Once the goals are met, problem solving efforts often stop so the attention and cognitive resources they consume can be used elsewhere. Setting specific goals provide decision makers with a concrete target against which they can compare the actual performance of the system and initiate corrective action when there is discrepancy. The more concrete and specific the goal, the easier it is for people to determine which information cues are important and which can be ignored, and to decide which actions to take to reach the goal. Aspirations and goals themselves are adaptive and respond to experience. In the department store pricing example, the standard markup over wholesale costs adapted to experience. Store managers gradually adjusted target markups to the actual markups realized by the store after responding to the competitor's price and holding sales to move surplus inventory. Problem decomposition and decentralized decision making. Limited information processing capability forces people to divide the total task of making a decision into smaller units. By establishing sub goals, the complexity of the total problem is vastly reduced. The composition of decision problems into sub goals is also an important motivation for organizational specialization. Each organizational subunit is charged with achieving a small number of sub goals. Like, for example, the sales organization is charged with meeting sales goals. And also, another example, the manufacturing organization must deliver on time and below certain cost targets. Within each of these functions, further decomposition takes place. Inside the manufacturing organization, individual machine operators must hit their daily quotas and maintenance technicians strive to clear the backlog of work orders. Typically, the goals of each organizational subunit are broken down into still smaller sub-goals until the connections between the decisions the agent can make and the agent's goals are clear and unambiguous. In deciding how to achieve a goal, decision makers tend to ignore or treat as exogenous those aspects of situation they believe are not directly related to it. Intended rationality. Cognitive limitations and the other bounds on rationality mean decisions are often made as if there were no time delays, side effects, feedbacks, or nonlinearities. Since real systems often involve considerable dynamic complexity, decisions made in this fashion often cause policy resistance, instability, and dysfunction. Does this mean decision makers are irrational or just plain stupid? Not at all. Human behavior is usually purposeful. Most decisions are motivated by a certain logic. The modeler must uncover and represent the mental models of the decision makers and represent the rationale for their decision rules. A decision rule is locally or intendedly rational if it would produce reasonable and sensible results if the actual environment were as simple as the decision maker presumes it to be. That is, if the premises accepted by the subject were true. For example, it is sensible for a firm to cut prices to stimulate market share when capacity utilization is low if the managers believe that competitors won't or can't respond by cutting their own prices. Figure 15-1 shows a causal diagram of the situation. The company cuts prices when capacity utilization falls below some normal or target level, forming a negative feedback as managers attempt to fill the line, or loop B1. If the system were as simple as the managers presume it to be, that is, if the price of competing products were in fact exogenous, then cutting prices to stimulate demand and boost profits would make sense. But the manager's mental model is like the proverbial tip of the iceberg. It includes only a small fraction of the feedback structure in the system. Competitors are likely to set prices using the same fill the line logic. Cutting prices when utilization drops creates a reinforcing feedback or R1, in which a drop in price caused the market share and hence utilization of competing firms to fall, leading them to cut their prices. The company finds its market share and utilization do not improve as expected and cuts price again, closing the positive loop. When the presumption of exogenous competitor price is false, locally rational attempts to fill the line lead to an unintended price war that destroys profitability for all. Testing for intended rationality. Partial model tests. Partial model tests help you to determine whether the decision rules in your model are intendedly rational. In a partial model test, each organizational function or decision point is isolated from its environment until the environment is consistent with the mental model that underlies the decision rule. The subsystem can then be challenged with various exogenous patterns in its inputs. For case study, we have modeling high-tech growth firms. Forrester's market growth in the year 1968 model illustrates how bounded the rationality can be presented in model and how the intended rationality of a model can be tested. The market growth model grew out of Forrester's experience advising entrepreneurs and companies in the high-tech industry. It is one of several models of high-tech growth firms Forrester built during the 1960s. These models address the puzzle that is still an issue today. Most new companies fail. Some grow for a while but then stagnate. Still fewer manage to grow but experience periodic crises, often inducing turnover of top management. Only a very small number seem able to grow rapidly and steadily for extended periods of time. Forrester could discern no obvious difference between the success and failures in the quality of the products, the creativity of their engineers, or other fundamentals. He became convinced that the explanation for the differing outcomes lay in the different decision rules used to manage the enterprise and the anticipated side effects of policies that appeared to be rational and well-intentioned when viewed in isolation. In Figure 15-2, the model represents a single firm competing in potentially unlimited market. To keep the model as simple as possible, Forrester deliberately omitted many organizational functions and structures. For example, there is no income statement or balance sheet, and competitors are included implicitly in a simple market sector. The representation of the firm itself consists of three sectors, each representing a different organizational subunit. As you can see, in Figure 15-2, there are only sales, order fulfillment, and capacity acquisition. To summarize this chapter, simulation models are descriptive. The decision rules in models must conform to actual practice, warts and all. The modeler can then design policies to improve performance. An extensive body of evidence shows that the rationality arises because the complexity of the systems in which we live and the decisions we must make overwhelm our cognitive capabilities. Consequently, we use various heuristic rules of thumbs to enable us to make reasonable decisions in the time available. This chapter also showed how models consistent with bounded rationality and behavioral decisions theory can be formulated and how the intended rationality of the decision rules can be tested. Sometimes these heuristics produce systematic errors and cause the quality of decision making to fall far short of rational behavior. Research in behavioral decisions theory has documented a wide range of these heuristics and identified many errors and biases to which they frequently lead. Also, this chapter tells us that partial model tests enable you to assess whether the simulation agents and organizational subunits are locally rational given their mental models, local incentives, and knowledge of the system. It also helped uncover flaws in model formulations and help build confidence that your representation of the decision rules of the people in the systems are sensible and consistent with your knowledge of how they think and behave. Partial model tests help you to identify situations where sensible people operating with intendedly rational decision rules can interact to create dysfunctional dynamics for the system as a whole. And that's the end of this chapter.